Oh, there you are. I've been waiting for you. I wanted to give you a little lesson on how to write an introduction for the AP English language test, and I'm using three examples that your classmates wrote, introductions for the essays on Outliers, Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers. So I'm going to get to that in just a second. They're good essays. I am going to mark them up, so don't feel that all the markings is somehow a bad thing. I just want to point out quite a few things if I can. So anyway, if you remember, the prompt had to do with what are the recurring patterns that Gladwell uses in Outliers. It's a good topic because each chapter seems so different from the preceding one that maybe you don't recognize the patterns that are similar in each chapter. You did a really nice job with it. Really read the question thoroughly, read it 2 or 3 times, make sure you answer the question. That is probably the number one thing. Also, don't put evidence into your introduction. Many of you are putting in a lot of, for examples, evidence right in the introduction. Save that for later. I'm not going to tell you how long the intro has to be, but as I go through the examples, we'll talk a little bit more about that. Another thing that a few of you did was you commented on whether or not you thought these were good strategies. And that really wasn't the question. So whether you liked the patterns or didn't like the patterns doesn't really matter. You need to just kind of stick with what are the patterns. Okay, so the scoring for the essays has changed quite a bit in 1 year. Last year at this time, it was scored on a 1 to 9 scale, 9 being the best, and I always said you should shoot for a 7. And then this year, a little earlier in the year, they changed that scoring system to a 1 out of 6 scale. I didn't like it, but I'm an old timer, 5 and dimer, and change is hard for me. You know that Todd Snyder song, Old Timer, 5 and Dimer? Old timer, 5 and dimer, too late to turn back now. Old timer, 5 and dimer, time to and age like wine somehow. Every time I hear that old timer, I think of 5 and dimer because of that song, Age Like Wine. Okay, that's enough entertainment. Let's get to your essays. I was going to say that it went from 1 to 9 scale, then 1 to 6, and now in this year of the coronavirus, it's gone to 1 to 5. You're just writing one essay. So that's lucky for you. And now, with these examples, I'm going to tell you if the essay's got a 3, a 4, or a 5. Okay, here's essay intro number 3. Everyone wants the key to success. However, there's a stark comparison to those who just dream of it versus those who dedicate the time and effort to make it happen. In Malcolm Gladwell's book, Outliers, he hones in on a very particular group from the latter category, those who serve as anomalies in their community. Gladwell proposes, however, that even the outliers of society didn't make it just on their own, but instead they are a product of multiple factors based on just pure luck. The author evidently supports the argument through storytelling, scientific studies, and through analysis to substantiate the reason for success behind outliers. This intro has a really nice flow to it. It's, I think, 5 sentences long. You can tell that the writer, let's just say it's a she, just use the she pronoun, that she is confident and writes in sophisticated sentences. The thesis is at the end, and it's a listing thesis of 3 things. And I do like how she has storytelling first, because as I mentioned the other day, I think some of you went on a deeper dive into the waters to find things, and that's always interesting, but you can't forget the surface ripples. And the most obvious thing is that he is an incredible storyteller, and he uses some literary strategies like reversals in telling his stories. So that's what really sucks you in, is his storytelling ability. Let's go to this one. Okay, so here we go. I'm just going to take you through my comments. The light blue are good things. The purplish blue is my thesis, and then we have my comments in yellow here and some arrows. I guess the first thing I'd like to say is I'm wondering if you really need the first 2 sentences. I do think it's a nice run-in, and it doesn't bother me, but maybe we could just start in Malcolm Gladwell's book, Outliers. It's not called The Outliers, just Outliers. That's not going to bother the AP people. So that's something you can think about. Sometimes you say things that are, sounds like a desperate way to get started. So, but anyway, I'm not gonna dwell on that too much. One thing I like about this are the verbs. The verbs are very strong. Hones in, proposes, supports, substantiates. That's really excellent. And I really like this dash here, explaining those who serve as anomalies in their community. He hones in on a very particular group. I want to make sure I know that you know what particular group you're talking about, and that's what a dash does. It is further explains. Plus, spelled anomalies correct, and that's really fantastic. Okay, then I had a little problem right here. I think you need to say instead of, I mean, you need to say including. And also this one half of a line is a little bit awkward. So I think you can do it in fewer words, but instead they are product of multiple factors, including pure luck. Yeah, I think you could probably do that in a couple of words. Evidently also gives me a little bit of trouble here. The author evidently supports. Do you mean evidently at the beginning the author supports, or do you mean more as supports with evidence? I'm a little confused about what that means. Okay, so and I like these combination zingers. Here we've got the adjective noun, and down here we have, well, if I like that choice of evidently, that we got the adverb and verb. Maybe before storytelling, you also could use a little zinger, and just through strong storytelling, another word there as an adjective of what this kind of storytelling. However, here's what, so originally I said this ended up being one of the top-notch essays because the evidence was really strong. It needs a little bit of tightening. And what about the first 2 sentences? Smart word choice, good clarity. So I ended up saying the thesis is strong. It shows an accurate or logical reading of the patterns Gladwell uses, and she puts storytelling first. If I were only grading the intro, I'd give it a 4 on a 1 to 5 scale. So that is really nice. Let's go to the second essay. Okay. Integrating stories from all of history and throughout the world, Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers. Now, these crossouts are her own when she wrote it. We'll use another she pronoun. So I wanted to include this. I wanted to include it exactly the way it was written. And I do like that. It shows that you are editing as you go. Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers content is varied and diverse. Each chapter, however, follows a similar form. Gladwell introduces a story about which his audience likely has preconceived notions. Next, Gladwell brings out specific experiments, studies, and data tables. He educates the reader. Lastly, he uses the newfound knowledge to challenge the preconceived notions the reader likely made on their first glance at the story presented at the chapter's exposition. And with this essay, I also decided I was going to include the last sentence, which I thought really upped the game here of the whole essay. A really strong last sentence, and it reads like this: instead of the traditional one-size-fits-all narrative of hard work resulting in success, Outliers is about retraining our brains, and this repeated structure, strengthened by the fact that it holds true across time and space, effectively reforms the reader's thought process in a lasting and meaningful way. This has 6 sentences, and I think what it does for me is it has a little bit of a game changer idea in there that I really liked. And I think maybe the rhythm is a little bit choppy in the sentences. But let's switch to what I've said here. Okay. The first thing I did was add that about success at the top because it seemed a little bit vague. What is Gladwell's book about and what is he talking about? So integrating stories about success, I just threw that in. It needed a little bit more to context. When she was crossing out, I did like that she embeds, however, that's one of my pet peeves. I think you should look for an opportunity to embed, and I would say 70% of the time it's better to have it not as the first word in the sentence. However, this one, however, is the first word, and it works there. I think you could say there's a stark comparison, however, to those who just dream of it, but a lot of it depends on how it sounds in the flow of the sentence that comes before it. Okay. One thing that you may notice is there isn't really one sentence that is a thesis. There's practically 4 sentences here that are that make up the thesis. They don't tell you there has to be one sentence for the thesis. They don't tell you 4 is okay. But I think this works just fine because the logic of it all seems to flow pretty well. It's a choppy flow, but at least the logic behind the sentences flows. Okay, let's see what else. There's a spelling problem, and spelling is not going to bother them unless it happens frequently in each paragraph. If there are multiple words, different words. I think she actually misspelled preconceived twice, but my autocorrect changed it down here. It's not a big thing, spelling, unless it gets to be annoying. Okay. What I do like is this idea of preconceived notions. And part of it is that nobody else was even talking about that. And it is such an important thing. He's not telling stories about things that have obvious lessons to them. He tells you something that you think you already know what the lesson is, and instead you don't. And that's really a big part of the pattern that he has, is that he takes things where you thought you knew a lot about Bill Gates, but you didn't really. You thought you knew a lot about the Beatles, but you didn't really. So for me, that was sort of the game changer. Okay. Um, and I like the little combination zinger, newfound knowledge, to challenge the preconceived notions. Um, I would also give this, this was a 4 essay. It needed more support, but mentioning the preconceived notions was a game changer. It was a little choppy on the vagueness of the intro. Um, okay. So, whoa, there's a hummingbird. Can you see it? Oops, I guess not. I guess you're on the screen share. Um, I think the intro is more of a 3, and I think the essay ended up being more of a 4. I guess we're going to go to the last one, which is essay number 1. Throughout his book, Outliers, author Malcolm Gladwell attempts to bring his long, complex theory of how extreme success comes about to the general public. To have any hope of keeping the reader engaged and actively learning, he must make his book kinetic, relatable, and self-explanatory. To do this, he weaves within each chapter a symphony of scientific studies, exemplary stories, and personal commentary, never straying in any one type for too long, and always tying all these elements into a concise closing thesis. Okay. This is done in 3 sentences. I think it's good. I think it's on the verge of exciting with a few of these carefully selected words. How many sentences in your intro? 2 is not enough. 3 to 6 is probably the range you're thinking of. An introduction with 8, 10 sentences is too much. You don't have time for that. You want to get to the point, and you want the reader to know what the point is pretty fast. Remember, these essay readers, they have a stack of essays. They're reading all day long. They don't want to work too hard at getting to what your main point is. So no elaborate introductions. Let's see what my comments say here. Okay. Throughout his book, Outliers, I don't think you need author. Malcolm Gladwell attempts to bring his long, complex theory of how extreme success comes about to the general public. To me, that's a misplaced modifier. I think what Gladwell is trying to bring is his theory to the general public. And so I would want to get that closer to theory so that I'm not confused of how extreme success comes about. Yeah, change that, because that would be ending with the preposition, and that's not so bad, ending with the preposition. You know, with grammar things, I usually put them on a 1 to 10 scale. If you have a grammar faux pas, how serious is it? If it makes you confused about what's happening in the sentence, then it's serious. If it's not, like ending, some people say don't end a sentence with a preposition. That's not a big thing for me. I don't know. I would put that as an 1 or 2 as problem. Other things like split infinitives, attempts to bring. See, that's not a split infinitive, but if you were to split that, some people say, whoa, that is awful. I don't think that's very often awful. But a misplaced modifier is more on the serious side, because there's confusion about that. Okay, to have any hope of keeping the reader engaged and actively learning, you must make his book kinetic. If there's a word that I only saw once in all those 100+ essays, and it's a really good word. And when you can come up with an original word, it sticks with you. And later you remember that word. And I also remember the word symphony. symphony of studies, scientific studies. You need to have a couple original words that show that there's personality behind you as a writer. You don't want too much personality, but you need to come up with something writerly, a little bit more interesting. He follows up kinetic with a misspelling. Okay, SP spelling and self-explanatory. He weaves within each chapter a symphony of scientific studies, exemplary stories, and personal commentary, never staying in any one type for too long, and always tying, that's misspelled too, all of these elements into a concise closing thesis. So there's a misplaced modifier and there's two spelling errors. You would hope that the next paragraph doesn't have that. And that's kind of the holistic way that essays are graded. It's hard for me to separate the introduction from the whole essay. I gave this one a 30 out of 30 when I was scoring it and putting it in the grade book, which probably make it a 5. A 5 does not mean it's perfect. So that's good for you. Obviously, the kind of nervous beginning that you have and the possibility of some misspelled words needs to clear up as you go. If I'm worried about misspelling too much, I pick a different word because I don't want some grader to say, oh, there's another misspelled word. So I'm not saying spelling doesn't matter. It does matter, but they expect in a timed essay, you're going to make a few misspellings like that. I think this is getting long for you to focus. I was going to juggle, but I played my guitar and maybe I'll juggle next time. Okay, we'll see you soon.